The prairie stretched out like a faded quilt, seams of dry grass stitched by time, waving under a sun that cared little for the hearts it beat down upon. From the porch of a lonely ranch house, the daughter of the place watched the horizon as though it might whisper secrets. 20 years on this land had taught her patience, but had also hollowed a quiet ache into her chest, one she guarded more fiercely than the cattle. She was no delicate bloom. Her hands were brown from work, nails rimmed with earth, shoulders broad from lifting hay bales since she was barely more than a slip of a girl. The wind had kissed her skin harshly, yet when she smiled, there bloomed a softness most folk were too blind to see. Those same folk had decided long ago that the rancher's daughter was sturdy, yes, perhaps even handsome in her own rough way, but not the sort of woman a man would want on his arm come Sunday service. There had once been a young man, a merchant's son, who courted her with glib words and gifts of candy from the general store. He liked the idea of her land more than the shape of her heart. When he discovered her laugh carried the same untamed grit as her hands, he turned his affections to a preacher's pretty niece. Since then, she'd kept her hopes tamped down tight, like coals banked for a winter night. But her father was coughing more, each fit racking his thinning frame. The ranch needed more than her 2 hands, and certainly more than the old man's shaking ones. So one brittle evening, as a cold sky cracked with stars, she wrote a letter by lamplight. A mail-order husband. It felt shameful at first, but practical, a transaction not of love, but survival. She scarcely mentioned herself in the letter. Spoke only of acreage, cattle, debts nearly cleared. Folded it with trembling fingers. Weeks later, the mailbox became a sacred thing. Each rustle inside sent her heart skittering like a field mouse. Then one afternoon, the stagecoach arrived in a cloud of dust so thick it seemed the earth itself was trying to hide what it carried. When it cleared, out stepped a man who looked as if life had chewed him down to the bone and spat him back out. 30, perhaps, hard to tell under the grime. His coat was patched in 3 places, boots scuffed to near ruin. Yet he stood tall, shoulders squared, eyes sweeping the crowd not with pride but with careful steadiness, like a man forever wary of blows. The townsfolk tittered. A boy pointed. The blacksmith's wife covered her mouth and shook her head. Her stomach twisted, a sharp, shameful thing, until she noticed him bending to help an old woman from the coach. He lifted her trunk next, though his arms quivered with effort. When he finally turned toward her, removing his battered hat, there was something like apology in his gaze, and something steadier beneath it, an unspoken promise that he was here to work, to try. She led him back to the ranch with few words. The wagon creaked beneath them. Her father watched from the porch, lines of worry etched deep, though when the stranger climbed down and offered a respectful nod, some of that tension eased. By evening, the man had taken to repairing a section of fence that had been loose for near a year. Hammer rang through twilight, sharp and sure. She found herself lingering by the porch rail, breath catching at the sight of him, lean frame outlined by lantern glow, sleeves rolled to the elbow, forearms marked by old scars that spoke of harsher trials than any fence could offer. They met by the water trough later. He paused, hands dripping. His voice was low, roughened by long miles of silence. "Reckon I ain't much to look at," he said, eyes fixed on the boards between them. "But I got a pair of strong hands, an honest will, and no mind to run from hard days. If that's enough for you, I'd be obliged to stay." Her chest tightened painfully. A part of her wanted to flee inside, hide from this choice. But something in his tone, raw, humble, steady, rooted her feet to the dirt. "I don't need fine looks," she said at last, voice softer than she intended. "Just someone who'll stand with me when the land turns cruel." A slow breath escaped him, like a man who'd been holding it for far too long. He met her eyes then. For a heartbeat, she saw past ragged edges, straight into a soul as weathered and earnest as her own. That night, after her father had retired, she found herself again on the porch. The moon was climbing, fat and gold. From beyond the barn came the quiet thud of his hammer, still mending what others had let rot. Each strike felt like a promise, echoing through the cooling dark. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling a cautious warmth spread. Maybe it was too soon for hope, but it unfurled anyway, delicate as new grass pushing through frost. Inside, the lamp still burned, waiting for someone to claim its light. Summer arrived with a fury of sun, bleaching the fields to a brittle gold. The ranch heaved under the weight of harvest, of calves needing brand and wheat begging sickles. In this season, the stranger proved himself more than any promise scrawled in desperate ink. He rose before the rooster's crow, shoulders bowed to labor until sweat soaked through every seam. Never complained, even when splinters pierced deep or when a bull turned on him, horns scraping past his thigh with a hiss that left her breathless in terror. In quiet hours, they found small ways to learn each other. His hands, for all their calluses, moved gently around the smaller creatures. Once she watched him cradle a lamb born too soon, thumbs stroking its fragile head as though urging it to fight. Another dusk, he lingered by the porch to mend her father's old hat, thread pulled through leather with meticulous care. She noticed how his brow furrowed, how his lips pressed tight, as though fixing the hat meant stitching together more than fabric, perhaps pride, perhaps some unspoken hope. Still, a shadow clung to him. Sometimes she caught his gaze drifting past her shoulder, into the middle distance where dust swirled in ghostly shapes. In those moments, sorrow lined his face, so profound it near took her breath. When she asked, he would only shake his head, muttering of old debts, old wrongs that weren't hers to carry. As weeks unfurled, townsfolk found reason to visit, thin excuses that let them see the mail-order husband for themselves. A cousin needing seed, a neighbor seeking to borrow a plow blade. They'd cast sly glances, whisper later about how a woman of decent means settled for a man who came with little more than the clothes on his back. Her pride flared hot under their scrutiny. Yet whenever she returned to the ranch, found him at the well or oiling tack in a barn, that fire cooled into something tender. He never looked upon her with pity or expectation, never reached for more than she offered. In his quiet presence, she felt wholly herself, not some land-rich prospect or a woman to be pitied for her solitary years. One blistered afternoon, trouble came wearing familiar boots. The merchant's son rode up with two friends, laughter loud and brittle as glass under wagon wheels. He swung down, swagger thick on his shoulders, eyes traveling the yard as if weighing what he might still claim. He gave her a grin that was all teeth, offered lazy compliments about how the place looked well kept, better than he'd expected. When she didn't smile, his gaze turned sharper, settling on a man by the barn who paused mid-task, hammer lowering but not dropping. "So this your new prize?" he drawled, spitting into the dirt. Must have been hard up to send for a beggar. Her stomach nodded, but before she could speak, the stranger stepped forward. Dust rose around his boots, sun glinting off sweat on his neck. His eyes were calm, so steady it near unsettled her, the way a quiet river might hide deep currents ready to pull a man under. "I reckon it's your business to move along," he said, voice low, but edged in iron. "Ain't no welcome here for those who come only to sneer." The merchant's son laughed, clapped his companions on the back. "You hear that?" Hired himself a tongue to match the ragged coat. "Be careful, darling, or he'll talk you right out of house and home." Then he made the mistake of reaching for her arm. It was casual, almost playful, yet carried the weight of all the years he'd presumed to lay claim. Before his fingers could close, the stranger's hand was there, not cruel, not rough, but firm as a gate latch. Their eyes met, something cold and old passing between them. The merchant's son flinched, pulled back as though bitten. "We don't need your counsel nor your company," the stranger said, each word precise as a chisel strike. "Now get." For a long breath, it seemed the afternoon itself paused. Then the merchant's son spat again, muttered a curse about fools and their charity, and swung up into his saddle. His companions followed, laughter forced brittle. They rode off, leaving behind only churned earth and a silence that pulsed like a fresh bruise. She realized then her hands were trembling. The stranger noticed, took them gently in his own, thumbs brushing over the backs until the quivers stilled. His touch was warm, unhurried, the way sunlight feels when it finally slips through after days of cloud. "Thank you," she breathed, though the words seemed small beside the magnitude of her relief. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "I aim to stand where I'm needed." That evening, they shared supper under a sky unraveling into indigo. Her father dozed nearby, the porch creaking beneath his shifting weight. Across the small table, the stranger's eyes caught the lantern glow, and for a fragile heartbeat, the world seemed made only of gentle light and quieter promises. In the hush that followed, her heart stirred with something dangerously close to trust. Outside, coyotes called from distant hills, voices twining through the dark like a blessing or a dare.